Welcome everybody to POL 150 and this week's lecture about conservatism. All right, so conservatism, let's just get into it right away. Where did it begin? Well, it was really a reaction of political writers against the huge, fast-paced changes that were happening in society. For example, with the French Revolution, right? So for Edmund Burke in particular is associated very strongly with conservatism, and he wrote a book called Reflections on the Revolution in France. So it really was a reaction to the very rapid changes that were happening in society. And conservatism has some specific themes. Now, there are different versions of conservatism, as you will read about for this week. There's a libertarian version, there's an authoritarian version, there's a paternalistic version, but all of them share these common themes. All right, so one of them has to do with, of course, tradition. So really, this is the idea that there are things that we know from the past that are important, that we want to carry on. They're a source of guidance, and we don't want to make very fast changes because fast changes can be destabilizing, right? So it's not to say that we're not going to change at all. It's just change should be slow and cautious because we don't want to throw away all of that wisdom that we have inherited from the past. Another core theme has to do with the fact that people as humans are psychologically, morally, and intellectually flawed, right? In contrast to the way that liberalism thinks about humans, conservatism really emphasizes this human imperfection. And because of that imperfection, what you need are strong institutions like family and marriage and order and law to promote the stability and to ensure that there's values enshrined in communities because of the fact that just people on their own are flawed and imperfect. Another core theme of conservatism is that society is an organic entity, right? And what we mean by this is that people are not the types of individual, atomistic, utility maximizers that liberal theories will have argued that they are, right? That we're not just a bunch of individuals, but really we cannot be separated from the society in which we are in, right? And social bonds like the family and the church and community, these are really, really important, right? And this kind of builds on the idea that humans are imperfect, so you need to be in a state of community. Communities provide security and meaning, and if you change one part, it affects everything else. So again, we need to be cautious about the changes that we implement. Another core theme of conservatism has to do with hierarchy and authority. So conservatives do believe that inequality is inevitable, right? Which is something that the classical liberal theories believed as well. But because of that inequality, what conservatives will argue is that you need to have a sense of authority that will bring order and discipline and stability to society, right? And again, because we're a society of imperfect individuals and we need to have those strong social bonds, that authority needs to be imposed from above to ensure that we do have social harmony and cohesion, right? So it's very hierarchical and very much focused on authority. Again, continuing to build on the earlier themes that I just had mentioned. And then finally, property, right? Property is not something that we should value just because it might bring us economic benefits, right? Maybe pass on generational wealth, but property is really vital for conservatives. It has a lot of psychological and personal and also social importance. So the reason for that is because property ownership gives you a stake in society, right? You feel like you're now a member of this organic society, right? We're all imperfect humans. We want slow incremental change, and we're all invested in this society. And so having property be a core theme means that individuals who own property want to have stability, and they care about society. They expect there to be law and order, and they respect it themselves. It creates a sense of belonging and continuity, and again fosters social cohesion. So those are the core themes, right? And there are different varieties of conservatism, different flavors, if you will. There's a libertarian bent that really says that you should have a lot of economic liberty and not a lot of regulation of social life, but that you do need to have a strong state to help the market maintain order. And we can contrast that with neoliberalism, which also is based on classic liberal ideas, also thinks that, private markets are good, any kind of public things are bad. But to promote individual freedom and the free market, in contrast to libertarian conservatism, you actually need to have a pretty minimal state, right? This is the idea where supply side economics comes in. So if you ever heard that term, that we should really let the producers produce as opposed to focusing on a demand side economy in which you would let the consumers consume, right? Then there's an authoritarian bent of conservatism with, again, the idea here that we're still thinking about those core themes, but that the government needs to come from above, right? Really hierarchical in the sense that you have a government that doesn't come to office through most of the time free and fair elections, that's ruling over the country to promote this social order, right? This quote from so this was the Tsar of Russia, who had said, orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationalism in response to the French Revolution's focus on liberty, equality, and fraternity. Then there's a neoconservative bent, right, which doesn't have to be anti-democratic, but it falls into this idea of having government from above, that you need to have a minimal but also a strong state to restore public order, to do things like increase family and religious values. And neoconservatism was really associated with the George W. Bush administration, with the idea that you have this foreign policy of increasing U.S. military power and promoting democracy to keep the U.S.'s benevolent global hegemonic rule, right? So the U.S. was that global hegemon, the sole state that was in charge, but in a benevolent way, per neoconservatism, right? Then you have a paternalistic version of conservatism. Here, the idea is that maybe you're a compassionate conservative, you're trying to provide for more like social safety nets, but it's really so that the poor don't pose a bigger threat to social order. And then you have a Christian democratic version as well, which emphasizes Catholic social values. And those are the different types of conservatism.